Welcome, everyone, and especially a huge welcome to our listener. We're really thrilled to have you with us for this custom-tailored deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely. We're glad you're here.
And we are jumping straight in today. I want to be really clear right off the bat about our mission. We aren't here to just, skim the surface of a plot or give you a standard recap. This is not a podcast episode.
Right.
We are going on a highly immersive, incredibly detailed journey into the anatomy of suspense. We're looking at the crushing weight of total isolation and really the raw mechanics of psychological terror.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this is drawn directly from a curated stack of excerpts from Stephen King's monumental 1996 novel, Desperation.
That is exactly our focus today. We're going to meticulously explore how one of the most mundane, relatable concepts imaginable, which is a classic American cross-country road trip, is systematically dismantled.
Yeah.
And we really want to look at how that dismantling exposes our deepest vulnerabilities. We are stripping away the infrastructure of civilization here to see what happens when people are left entirely at the mercy of something they just cannot comprehend.
The source material we have is incredibly rich. We're working with text excerpts from the opening chapters of the book alongside some brilliant visual references to the original cover art.
Which is iconic.
It really is. If you just close your eyes and picture that cover, it sets the tone instantly. You have this lone, silhouetted figure walking down this desolate, endlessly straight highway.
Right.
The shoulders of the road are studded with these jagged, almost aggressive cactus plants, and looming above the entire scene is this brooding, heavy sky that looks like a bruised plum.
It's a very heavy image.
It instantly communicates this vast, uncaring emptiness. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the terrifying premise at the heart of our deep dive today hits a primal nerve.
Yeah, it does.
What happens when the person who is meant to protect you, especially when you are completely vulnerable in the middle of nowhere, turns out to be the monster?
It's the ultimate subversion of the social contract. But before we get into the specific details of the text, I actually want to pose a question to you, the listener.
Okay.
What stands out to you when you think of total isolation? Is it the silence? Is it the lack of resources? Or is it that sudden, visceral realization that if something goes wrong, there is absolutely no one coming to help?
That's a chilling thought.
Keep that feeling in the front of your mind as we talk today, because that vulnerability is the absolute bedrock of this entire narrative.
So let's start right there with the geography, the setting itself.
Yeah.
We begin on U.S. Highway 50 in Nevada, which is famously dubbed the loneliest highway in America.
It earned that title for a reason.
Definitely. And reading through these excerpts, it strikes me that the setting isn't just a backdrop. It actually acts as the very first antagonist of the story, long before any human threat steps onto the stage.
I would argue it's the most effective antagonist in the first act. The landscape of the Great Basin operates as an active, hostile force. It meticulously strips away all the modern safety nets we rely on.
Yeah, the things we take for granted.
Exactly. Think about the conveniences that give us our baseline psychological security. In this environment, they are instantly nullified. There is no cell service out there.
Right.
And we see this play out vividly later with the character Johnny Marinville, who is out in the desert dirt, frantically trying to get a signal on his mobile phone.
It's useless.
Completely useless. The isolation isn't just a feeling, it's a literal physical barrier. There's no passing traffic to flag down. There are no bystanders. The geography mandates a profound, inescapable vulnerability that just primes the characters for the horror that's about to come.
It really is an alien environment if you aren't used to it.
Yeah.
The text focuses heavily on Peter and Mary Jackson at the start. Since we know Peter is this New York boy, an assistant professor of English at NYU, he is entirely out of his element.
Oh, completely.
He brings up this fascinating concept of the urban zone of perception. He talks about how the massive empty sky is literally pressing down on him. He calls it desert agoraphobia.
Yes.
I found that so compelling because it's almost the inverse of the claustrophobia King usually plays with. It's like being a deep-sea creature that has lived its entire life under the immense pressure of the ocean, where the environment is tight and controlled.
Right.
And then suddenly being brought up to the surface. For Peter, the sheer unbroken openness of the Nevada desert is actually crushing him.
What's fascinating here is how that concept of the urban zone of perception highlights our reliance on architectural infrastructure for psychological stability.
Wow, yeah.
For someone like Peter, reality is defined by buildings, crowds, immediate access to help, and a horizon that is always broken by human-made structures. The moment you remove those visual and physical boundaries, his psychological defenses begin to crumble.
He's totally unmoored.
Exactly. He and Mary are disoriented. They're experiencing this creeping dread that they try to laugh off, joking about how creepy the state of Nevada is.
I mean, have you ever driven down a stretch of highway where you suddenly realized you haven't seen another car for an hour?
It's unsettling.
You catch yourself instinctively checking your gas gauge.
Oh, every time.
That tiny spike of panic, that realization of your own fragility, that is exactly what King is weaponizing here. Peter is trying to use his intellect to rationalize it, but his gut knows something is wrong.
That's a perfect comparison. It's that subtle shift from feeling independent to feeling exposed. And their unease is entirely justified. The landscape has already isolated them, it's softened them up, and then the environment delivers its first explicit warning.
Right, the first omen. Mary is looking out the window of their Acura, and she suddenly spots something horrific.
Yeah, this part is rough.
It's a dead, tiger-striped cat. But the crucial detail is that it isn't just roadkill on the asphalt. It has been nailed or glued directly onto a government speed limit sign. I mean, imagine you are the listener, sitting in that passenger seat. You're on a completely deserted road, hundreds of miles from home. The sky is pressing down on you, and you see a mutilated animal intentionally displayed on an official road sign. How quickly would your baseline sense of security just evaporate?
It would vanish instantly. Because a dead animal on the road is an accident. But a dead animal nailed to a speed limit sign is a message.
Exactly.
It's an immediate, visceral signal to the characters that the rules of civilized society have been suspended. Nailing a cat to a sign that literally displays the law is an act of deliberate, performative malice.
Like a medieval warning.
Exactly like a head on a pike in ancient times. It clearly states that whatever laws govern the rest of the country, they do not apply here.
I noticed Mary's reaction is purely visceral. The color drains from her face, and she demands Peter not even think about going back to check on it. But Peter, being the academic, immediately tries to intellectualize it.
Always the professor.
Right. He suggests it might be Satanists in the desert or just the intense people of central Nevada. Why do you think he does that? Why not just accept the threat and floor the gas pedal?
It's a classic defense mechanism. He is trying to build a logical, manageable framework around an irrational and terrifying event.
To make it make sense.
Precisely. If he can categorize it, saying, oh, it's just local Satanists, he reduces the unknown into something he can at least conceptualize, even if it's unpleasant. But the dread has already taken root. The mutilated cat is undeniable proof that they are in the presence of predators.
Which brings us to the subversion of authority. Because when the predator finally does arrive, he doesn't come slinking out of the brush like a wild animal. He comes with flashing blue lights.
This is such a brilliant shift.
The introduction of the sole law enforcement officer of Desperation, Nevada, is where the psychological manipulation reaches a completely different level.
This is where the narrative shifts from environmental dread to targeted psychological terror. We are introduced to a town cop who is physically imposing to an almost absurd degree. He is described as being at least 6'7" and weighing well over 250 pounds. He's a giant, wearing a crisp khaki uniform, a Sam Brown belt, and a Smokey Bear hat. But the sheer physical size is almost secondary to the weaponization of the uniform itself.
I completely agree. The physical intimidation is obvious, but the psychological trap is much more insidious. The cop pulls over Peter and Mary for a missing license plate.
Right.
Later on, we learn he rescues the Carver family, Ralph, his wife Ellie, and their kids, David and Kristen, after their RV tires are blown out by a spiked highway carpet. And he intercepts Johnny Marinville, the famous author who has pulled his Harley over to urinate by the highway.
Yes.
In every single instance, despite the massive size and the strange vibe of this cop, the victims comply with his orders. They get in his car.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it speaks volumes about our social conditioning. We are trained from childhood to defer to that uniform.
We really are.
We inherently trust that flashing blue lights represent safety, order, and objective authority. This draws parallels to something like the Milgram obedience experiments, where people complied with horrific instructions simply because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to.
Oh, that's a great connection.
Here, the cop brilliantly exploits that illusion of safety. He uses the standard scripts of law enforcement, asking for license and registration, warning citizens about road hazards to disarm their survival instincts. They cannot process the idea that the police officer is the threat.
That reliance on the script of a traffic stop is so interesting because there are tiny anomalies that the characters pick up on, but they ignore them because of that conditioning.
What kind of anomalies?
Well, for example, when he pulls over Peter and Mary, Peter checks the rearview mirror and notices something deeply unsettling. The cop approaches the car with empty hands.
Ah, yes.
No clipboard, no ticket book. Peter's had speeding tickets before. He knows how this works. What is the immediate psychological ramification of those empty hands?
It subconsciously signals that the official procedure is a sham. If a police officer isn't carrying the tools to write a citation, then writing a citation was never the agenda.
Exactly.
Peter's brain registers the anomaly, but his social conditioning overrides his intuition. He convinces himself it's just a quirk of a rural cop.
Let me push back on that slightly, though. Is it purely social conditioning, or is it also the geography we talked about earlier?
How do you mean?
Well, if a cop approaches your car with empty hands in downtown Manhattan, you might be suspicious, you might roll your window up, you might even argue, but out there on Highway 50 with no witnesses and no cell service, do they comply because they trust the uniform, or do they comply because they realize they are completely trapped?
That is a phenomenal distinction.
Yeah.
It is absolutely a synthesis of both. The uniform demands compliance, but the isolation demands submission. They are trapped by the geography, yes, but the uniform gives them a socially acceptable reason to submit without admitting to themselves that they are terrified. It allows them to maintain the illusion that they are participating in a legal process rather than a kidnapping.
And the cop tailors that illusion so specifically to each victim. With Peter and Mary, he uses the missing license plate, which we can strongly infer he or someone else removed, to initiate a search of their vehicle.
Yes.
With the Carver family, he manufactures a crisis. He tells Ralph Carver there is a dangerous man out in the desert with a rifle who laid down the spiked highway carpet, and they must abandon their RV and cram into his police cruiser immediately for their own safety. He plays the protector.
He shapeshifts to exploit their specific vulnerabilities. And his encounter with Johnny Marinville is perhaps the most twisted example of this.
Oh, absolutely. Johnny is this aging, somewhat arrogant literary lion riding his motorcycle cross-country. When the cop catches him urinating by the highway, the cop initially plays the role of a starstruck fan.
It's almost comical.
It is. He recognizes Johnny, quotes his books like Delight and Song of the Hammer, and completely strokes the author's ego. Johnny thinks he's just going to sign an autograph and ride off. The cop uses Johnny's own vanity to lower his guard.
Which leads us to the planted evidence. When the cop searches the trunk of Peter and Mary's car, he miraculously finds a gallon-sized baggie of marijuana tucked under the spare tire. He pulls the exact same trick on Johnny, planting an identical baggie in the saddlebag of his Harley.
The visual detail of that baggie is so darkly comedic. It's bizarrely decorated with a bright yellow Mr. Smiley Smile sticker.
Right.
It's such an absurd, almost mocking detail to associate with a felony drug arrest. But it got me thinking, why go through the charade? If this giant cop intends to kidnap and ultimately murder these people out in the middle of an empty desert, why bother with the theatrical performance of planting drugs and officially arresting them?
This raises an important question about his methodology and the psychology of control. Why the theater? The answer lies in the cognitive load it places on the victims.
Cognitive.
Yes. By framing them for a crime, he forces them into a defensive posture. Their minds become entirely consumed by the injustice of the situation.
They're trying to figure out how to defend themselves.
Exactly. They are so busy protesting their innocence, so focused on how they're going to explain this to a judge or a lawyer, that they don't realize they are being abducted by a killer. The illusion of a legal procedure acts as a psychological sedative. It keeps them compliant and distracted until the doors of the cruiser are locked from the outside.
It's terrifying. It keeps them playing by the rules of society while he is operating completely outside of them.
Right.
But that sedative wears off eventually. And that brings us to the surreal escalation of this narrative. The exact moment the mundane annoyance of a traffic stop fractures into a waking nightmare.
I want to zero in on the Miranda Rights scene with Peter and Mary in the back of the cruiser. It is a masterclass in psychological horror. They are locked in the cramped, mesh-divided back seat. Mary is panicking, desperately trying to explain to the back of the cop's head that the car belongs to Peter's sister, who is the known plothead, and that the drugs aren't theirs.
She's just spiraling.
She is, and the cop tells her to shut up, and his voice drips with this sudden, unvarnished venom.
Right, and then staring straight ahead through the windshield, the cop begins to recite their Miranda rights. He uses this flat, uninflected, almost robotic voice. You have the right to remain silent. If you do not choose to remain silent, anything you say may be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney.
The standard
The
script.
standard script. But then, without changing his tone, without missing a single beat, he casually slips in the phrase, I'm going to kill you. And then he smoothly continues, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you.
Let's analyze the mechanics of what that does to the human brain. The Miranda warning is a cultural touchstone. It is an auditory script we have all heard 1,000 times. Our brains know exactly the rhythm and the vocabulary of that script.
Yeah, we can recite it in our sleep.
Exactly. So when the cop inserts a lethal threat into the middle of a bureaucratic formula, it causes a cognitive short circuit. The brain literally struggles to process the contradictory input. Mary recognizes the threat immediately and is horrified. But Peter experiences profound cognitive dissonance.
He assumes he must have misheard it, right?
Oh.
Because his brain refuses to accept that a police officer just casually promised to murder them in the middle of reading their rights. He tells himself to act normally, thinking the cop doesn't even know what he just said.
It's Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance playing out in real time. Peter holds two conflicting beliefs. Number one, this man is a police officer following procedure. Number two, this man just said he is going to kill us.
You can't hold both.
You can't. To resolve the psychological stress, Peter chooses the path of least resistance. He invalidates the threat rather than accepting the collapse of his reality.
But the reality collapses anyway. The cop demands to know if they understand their rights. Peter croaks out an answer, and the cop suddenly turns around. The transformation is absolute.
It's terrifying.
His face is pale, his eyes are bulging like marbles, and he has bitten his own lower lip so hard that a thin stream of blood is running down his chin. He screams at them in this sudden explosive rage. He yells, "Do you understand your fucking rights or not? Answer me, you smart New York Jew."
The sudden introduction of that anti-Semitic slur is incredibly telling regarding the nature of the antagonist. Because Peter Jackson isn't Jewish, he's Presbyterian.
Exactly. So what is the purpose of the slur if it isn't even accurate?
It reveals that the cop is operating on a volatile, chaotic mixture of prejudice and madness. The hatred is entirely arbitrary. He isn't profiling Peter accurately. He is just lashing out with whatever hateful rhetoric bubbles up from his fractured psyche.
It's just raw malice.
Exactly. The bleeding lip, the sudden shift from a robotic monotone to screaming fury, it completely shatters the illusion of the rational lawman. It forces Peter and Mary to confront the violent, unpredictable entity lurking beneath the khaki uniform.
And as they drive into the town of Desperation itself, the physical environment begins to reflect that shattered, psychotic reality. The town is utterly bizarre. As they pass the welcome sign, which lists all the normal civic organizations and churches, someone has spray-painted the words, "dead dogs" across it.
Yes.
And hanging from the sign, with its rear paws dangling just above a puddle of its own blood, is an actual dead German Shepherd.
Which is a grotesque escalation of the dead cat on the speed limit sign we discussed earlier. It's an announcement that the localized madness they felt on the highway has consumed an entire community.
It gets even stranger. As they drive through the empty streets, Mary spots 3 bicycles resting upside down right in the middle of the main intersection. Their wheels are just spinning lazily in the hot desert wind.
That image is so evocative.
It really is. There are no children around, no bodies. Just empty streets and spinning bicycle wheels. It is such a haunting image of sudden, inexplicable abandonment.
I want to focus on how the characters process these undeniable visual anomalies. When confronted with scenarios that defy logic, our minds frantically search for a rational explanation. Even after seeing the bleeding cop, the dead dog, and the empty town, Peter still clings to the idea that this is a misunderstanding that will be cleared up at the station.
It's wild that he's still doing that.
He thinks about how he is an assistant professor, how he has plants waiting to be watered back in New York.
It's heartbreaking. He's trying to anchor himself to his mundane reality.
Yes, because the human mind desperately resists accepting that a sunny afternoon on an American highway has transitioned into a lethal, inescapable trap. But the spinning wheels, the dead dog, the bleeding cop, they are sensory facts that the rational mind simply cannot integrate. The architecture of his reality is failing.
And that architecture is finally violently obliterated when they arrive at the police station. If there was any lingering, desperate hope that this was all an elaborate misunderstanding, it is extinguished the moment the cop opens the doors to the municipal building. Let's talk about the shock of arbitrary violence.
The transition from the bright, hot desert sun into the machine-cooled, shadowy air of the station lobby marks a literal and metaphorical crossing of a threshold into absolute horror. Because waiting for them at the bottom of the stairs is the body of a little girl.
7-year-old Kirsten Carver. We learn through the shifting perspectives in the text that the cop, under the guise of rescuing the Carver family from the highway, brought them to the station, and then, for absolutely no rational reason, he pushed this innocent 7-year-old girl down a flight of stairs, breaking her neck.
It's so senseless.
When Peter and Mary walk into the lobby, they see her sprawled on the risers, her head unnaturally cocked to one side, her eyes wide open. And the cop looks down at the body of a child he just murdered and genially says, "Gosh, forgot all about her." But you can never remember everything, can you?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the narrative, the nature of the violence here is critically important. It is not stylized, it is not glamorous, and it isn't drawn out for dramatic tension.
No, not at all.
It is brutally blunt, sudden, and devastatingly permanent. Pushing a child down the stairs is a messy, ugly, realistic act of violence. It shatters what psychologists call the just world hypothesis.
What's that?
It's the belief that bad things only happen to people who deserve them or that actions have logical consequences.
It removes any illusion of negotiation, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you cannot reason with someone who casually murders a child and then acts mildly embarrassed for forgetting to clean up the body.
Precisely. It strips away the final layer of denial. And the blunt violence doesn't stop with Kirsten. Mary screams and tries to bolt. The cop shoves her through the doors. Peter, acting on pure protective instinct, lunges forward to help his wife.
His last act is trying to save her.
Yes. The cop catches Peter, hugs him close like an old buddy, and presses the barrel of a massive .45 caliber handgun directly into Peter's stomach. The cop says, "I don't care if you're a Jew or a Hindu. In desperation, we don't care about those things much." And then he pulls the trigger 3 times.
Just brutally fast.
The noise is muffled by Peter's body, but the impact is absolute. Peter Jackson, the English professor who was just worried about his roll aids an hour ago, is shot dead simply because he took a step forward.
The suddenness of Peter's death is a massive structural shock. We've been following Peter's perspective. We've been inside his head, listening to his academic rationalizations. He feels like the protagonist. And then he is abruptly, unceremoniously eliminated.
It pulls the rug right out from under the reader.
I want to ask you about a specific detail that connects to this violence. Earlier, when the cop drove Peter and Mary past the Carvers' abandoned RV, the text makes a point of highlighting a doll lying face down in the dirt at the foot of the stairs. It was Kirsten's doll, Melissa's sweetheart. King describes the little dress fluttering in the hot desert wind. What do you make of King focusing so heavily on that specific, mundane detail out in the harsh desert?
It's a brilliant use of a visual anchor. The doll is a symbol of innocence and domestic normalcy, entirely out of place in the brutal landscape. By focusing on the abandoned doll in the dirt, the narrative foreshadows the abandoned child on the stairs. Both the toy and the girl are cast aside by an uncaring, brutal force. The doll forces the reader to acknowledge the vulnerability of the children before we even know their fate.
That brings us to the reaction of the survivors. The remaining characters, Mary, Ralph Carver, his wife Ellie, their son David, and an older man named Tom Billingsley, are locked in the holding cells. When Mary is thrown into the room after witnessing her husband's murder, the instinct for resistance finally flares up.
It has to. They have nothing left to lose.
11-year-old David Carver, who was locked in a cell, suddenly starts shrieking with this savage, panicky intensity. He screams at Mary, "The shotgun lady! Get the shotgun! Shoot him! Shoot him, lady! Shoot him!"
And Mary, a poet and a faculty wife, who has likely never held a firearm in her life, lunges for a double-barreled shotgun lying on the station desk. She pulls back the hammers, aims it directly at the massive cop charging through the door, and pulls the triggers. But all she gets is a dry click. The gun is entirely empty.
It's an agonizing moment. But what really stands out is the cop's reaction. When Mary tries to shoot him point blank, he isn't afraid. He doesn't flinch or take cover. He laughs.
Yes.
He picks up a desk chair and uses it as a battering ram, slamming it into Mary's midsection, driving her against the bars of the cell. He physically dominates her with terrifying ease. But here is the crux of it. He doesn't kill her.
Right.
He easily could have. He blew Peter away without a second thought. But when he has Mary at his mercy, battered and sobbing on the floor, he hugs her and says, "Kill you? I'm not going to kill you, Mare. Gosh, no, not when things are just getting interesting."
That specific line is arguably the most chilling piece of dialogue in the first act. It radically shifts the paradigm of the story. It implies that the kidnappings, the psychological torture, and even the arbitrary murders are merely the prelude.
Just the warm-up.
Exactly. It strongly suggests that a grander, much more sinister game is afoot. These people haven't been gathered simply to be slaughtered. They have been gathered for a purpose. And that purpose is tied directly to the bizarre, alien mindset of their captor.
Which transitions us perfectly into discussing the philosophy of the madman. We need to talk about the language of the desert and the incredibly strange theology this cop operates under. Throughout the text, the cop frequently uses an exclamation that sounds like absolute nonsense. He says, talk. It's punctuated like a curse word or a verbal tick. Talk.
It is much more than a verbal tick. It is our first clue that we are dealing with something fundamentally non-human. When the cop arrests Johnny Marinville out on the highway, we get a terrifying glimpse into the cop's supernatural connection to the environment.
The coyote scene.
Yes. A scrawny, mangy coyote appears by the side of the road. The cop doesn't just look at it, he speaks to it. He uses a strange guttural language saying, Taka Allah. He refers to the coyotes as my children of the desert and calls them the can toy.
Johnny is watching this absolutely horrified. The cop takes a step toward this wild desert predator, claps his hands, and commands it to leave. He tells Johnny that he stole its eyes and that when it comes to desert wolves, if you steal their eyes, they aren't dangerous.
It's so deeply strange.
He speaks about the desert with this weird elliptical pretentiousness, calling it scripture in the wasteland and the resonance of lonely places. But it's not just poetic nonsense. The animal actually seems to obey him.
This connection to the predators of the desert is paired with a deeply twisted philosophical worldview. Once he has Johnny locked in the back of the cruiser, the cop delivers a bizarre theological lecture. He accuses Johnny, the famous writer, of mocking God and failing to write a truly spiritual novel. And then he introduces a highly specific, corrupted version of Gnostic terminology.
Yes. This part is so dense and fascinating. I found myself having to reread it to grasp exactly what he was saying. The cop tells Johnny that he glorifies his sarks while ignoring his pneuma. Johnny, who is just trying desperately to play along and keep the guy calm, recalls from his education that pneuma is the old Gnostic word for spirit. So Johnny assumes sarx means the body.
A logical assumption.
But the cop corrects him with absolute terrifying disdain. He says, sarx is not the body, soma is the body. Sarx is the flesh of the body. The body is made of flesh, but the body is more than the flesh that makes it. Can you break that down for us? Why makes that distinction so important to this monster?
It takes a moment to wrap your head around, but it is paramount to understanding the entity we are dealing with. In ancient Gnostic tradition, there is a deep division between the spiritual and the material. The cop is separating the soma, which is the complete physical vessel, the structural housing, from the sarx, which is the raw biological meat that composes it.
Okay, so sapa is the house, sarx is the bricks.
That's a great way to put it. And he separates both of those from the pneuma, the animating spirit or life force. By breaking a human being down into these distinct components, he is essentially declaring that people are nothing more than rotting meat that temporarily houses an ungrateful spirit.
That's incredibly bleak.
It is a philosophy that justifies ultimate violence because it completely degrades the inherent value of the physical human form. To him, tearing a person apart is just rearranging meat.
Okay, let's unpack this. Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly incredibly gross. Right after delivering this high-minded lecture on flesh and spirit, the cop's voice thickens. He starts hitching for breath.
Oh, this scene.
He is clearly building up to a massive sneeze. He gasps, drops the shotgun, and lets fly. But he doesn't sneeze mucus. He sneezes out a massive clot of blood and raw, red, filmy tissue that looks like nylon mesh. It splatters all over the dashboard and the steering wheel, and the text notes it smells intensely like rotted meat.
It is a profoundly visceral, nauseating moment. And the cop's reaction is what elevates it from gross-out horror to existential terror. He isn't alarmed that he is coughing up pieces of his own internal organs.
Not at all.
He calmly clears his throat, spits another crabapple-sized clod of bloody tissue onto the radio, and says to Johnny, "That was sarx. You might want to keep it in mind."
Johnny is sitting in the back seat, literally screaming, pressing his hands over his face. He realizes that the cop is deteriorating. He is decaying from the inside out.
Exactly. The physical breakdown of the cop's body proves his theological point. It strongly suggests that whatever pneuma, whatever ancient spirit is currently inhabiting this massive soma or body, it is literally burning the sarx or flesh out from the inside.
Like putting a high-voltage current through a regular wire.
Yes, the human body was not built to channel this kind of energy. He is a vessel that is rapidly degrading under the strain of possession. This completely recontextualizes everything we've seen so far. His massive size, his lack of sweating in the extreme desert heat, and his inhuman physical strength. He isn't just a big crazy cop. He is essentially a supercharged, rotting zombie driven by an alien will.
And just to drive home the supernatural reality of this entity, as the cop turns the cruiser around to head back to town, Johnny looks out the window and sees something impossible. Dozens of coyotes are sitting at 50-foot intervals along the highway.
Just waiting.
They're sitting perfectly still, completely silent, with their yellow eyes watching the police cruiser go by. Their tongues are lolling out as if they are grinning. It's a literal honor guard of desert predators, acknowledging their master as he drives his captive back to the slaughterhouse.
The image of the Coyote Honor Guard completely shatters Johnny's ability to rationalize the situation. Just as Peter tried to intellectualize the threat, Johnny was trying to manage a mentally ill police officer. But the synchronized behavior of the wildlife forces Johnny to confront the terrifying reality that he is in the grip of a power that commands the very landscape itself.
It's overwhelming. The scale of the threat just explodes in that moment, which is why the final section of our outline today is so crucial. We need a perspective outside of this immediate, localized terror to help us and the reader process what is actually happening. Let's look at the breadcrumbs left behind and the characters who find them.
The narrative strategically introduces Steve Ames and Cynthia Smith at this point. Steve is Johnny Marinville's roadie, and he's driving a yellow Ryder truck filled with gear a few hours behind Johnny's motorcycle.
Right.
Cynthia is a hitchhiker Steve picks up outside of Eli. She's described as a tough, pragmatic girl with two-tone hair who is fleeing a violently abusive past.
I found their inclusion so refreshing after the relentless darkness of the jail cell. What is their specific narrative function here?
They act as the outside observers. They are literally arriving at the scenes of the crimes hours after they have occurred, trying to piece the horror together. In a very real way, they represent you, the listener.
That makes sense.
They are navigating the aftermath of the violence, trying to make sense of scattered, chaotic clues without knowing the full, horrifying picture. They also provide a necessary shift in pacing. Their investigation allows the dread to build atmospherically rather than through direct violence.
Let's trace their journey, because the tension builds so meticulously. Steve is driving along Highway 50 when he receives a frantic, static-filled call on his cellular phone from Johnny. The connection breaks almost immediately, but Steve hears enough to know Johnny is in serious trouble, mentioning a cop and an RV pulled off the road.
Right, so they know what to look for.
Exactly. So Steve and Cynthia are on high alert. When they eventually find the Carvers' abandoned RV, the scene is deeply unsettling. Cynthia compares it to a modern-day Mary Celeste.
It's an apt comparison. The RV is sitting on flattened tires, the door is unlatched, banging rhythmically in the desert wind, and outside, half buried in the blowing sand, is the doll, Melissa's sweetheart.
There it is again.
When Steve and Cynthia go inside, the heat is stifling. But what really disturbs them isn't what's missing, but what has been left behind. They find things that people simply do not leave if they walk away willingly.
Right. They find David Carver's autographed baseball cards sitting on the dashboard, specifically cards signed by Albert Bell and Andy Van Slyke. They find Ellie Carver's ceramic frog jewelry caddy still containing her tourmaline ring and earrings. And they find Ralph Carver's silver money clip with $40 still folded inside it.
This is where Cynthia's background comes in.
Yeah, as Cynthia pragmatically points out, drawing on her own survival instincts from her abusive past. If a family abandons their vehicle to go get help for flat tires, they take their valuables. They lock the doors.
Exactly.
The presence of these items screams that the Carvers were forcibly removed in a state of sheer panic. Cynthia sums up the entire atmosphere perfectly when she sniffs the stale air of the RV and says, "Tell you what, Pilgrim, this smells bad."
This brings up the profound dread of finding mundane items out of context. An autographed baseball card is a symbol of childhood joy. A tourmaline ring is a symbol of domestic stability. Finding them abandoned in a sweltering RV on a deserted highway transforms them into artifacts of a tragedy.
They become crime scene evidence.
Steve and Cynthia are essentially doing psychological forensics, and the story the clues tell is terrifying.
And those breadcrumbs lead them further out into the harsh desert environment. Steve, acting on pure instinct, walks along the highway and spots a glint in the sand. Cynthia finds a small, wire-bound notebook half buried by a rock. It has Johnny Marinville's name on it, and inside are his mundane, everyday tour notes.
Just regular life stuff.
Yeah, there's a note about a woman named Patricia Franklin in St. Louis who is a vegetarian. It's a snapshot of a normal life, suddenly and violently interrupted.
And then they see the glint out in the desert scree. They run out and discover Johnny's pristine red and cream Harley-Davidson Softail hurriedly and indifferently buried in the sand.
Such a huge bike to just bury.
The cop tried to hide it, but the desert wind uncovered the handlebars. When Steve and Cynthia kneel beside the buried motorcycle, the atmosphere shifts dramatically. It ceases to be just a crime scene.
Yes, it becomes a site of palpable, almost supernatural dread. Cynthia looks at Steve and admits she feels like they are being watched. And Steve, who is a tough, seasoned roadie who has toured with bands like Black Sabbath and seen his share of crazy things, admits he feels it too.
It's closing in on them.
And right at that moment, as they are kneeling over the buried bike, the coyotes begin to howl in the distance. First one, then another, joining in harmony.
Cynthia is explicitly terrified of things that bite, and the howling of the coyotes in the gathering twilight crystallizes the unseen threat. The desert is no longer just empty space. It is an active, hostile environment filled with unseen, malevolent eyes. The breadcrumbs have led them directly to the edge of the trap, and the chapter ends with them getting back into the Ryder truck and driving east directly toward the town of Desperation.
Wow. Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize this incredible journey. We started with the creeping, almost existential unease of an empty Nevada highway where the sheer size of the sky presses down on you and tests your sanity.
We did.
We moved into the horrific subversion of law enforcement where the uniform of protection is weaponized to kidnap and control. We witnessed the brutal, shocking death child and a husband that shattered any illusion of safety. And we unpacked the insane, decaying theology of a giant cop who sneezes out his own rotting flesh while commanding the wolves of the desert. And it all ends with a small group of traumatized survivors locked in a jail cell while two outsiders slowly drive their yellow truck right into the jaws of the trap.
So what does this all mean? The true horror of Desperation lies not just in the existence of supernatural monsters or possessed cops. The profound terror comes from the sudden, violent upending of the invisible rules we rely on to navigate society every single day.
That social contract.
We place an immense amount of blind trust in the social contract. We trust that the lines on the road mean safety. We trust that a police badge means protection. When the police officer is the predator, when the arbiter of the law is the one acting with arbitrary violence, the social contract is voided. You are reduced instantly from a citizen with rights to a prey animal struggling to survive in the state of nature.
I want to connect this back to you, the listener. Think about your own dependencies the next time you are out on the road. The next time you are driving through a cellular dead zone, thousands of miles from the safety of your home, look at the vastness around you.
The vast country.
Ask yourself, how much faith are you placing in the uniform of a stranger? How quickly could your reality fracture if the person pulling you over isn't there to write a ticket, but to play a grander, much more sinister game?
It is a sobering thought, and it emphasizes how fragile our perception of civilization truly is when the infrastructure is stripped away.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own. It's something we touched on, but it opens up a massive, terrifying implication for the rest of the story.
What's that?
If, according to the cop's twisted theology, sarx represents the decaying flesh of the physical body, and we have seen this massive, superhuman cop literally sneezing out pieces of his own rotting tissue, bleeding from his pores, his body failing under an immense strain while he commands the local wildlife, what kind of ancient, formless pneuma or spirit has actually taken up residence inside him?
That is the big question.
And here is the truly terrifying part. When his current flesh finally fails, when that massive body rots away completely, whose body will that spirit seek out next?
That is the lingering nightmare of desperation.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the dark. Until next time, stay safe out there on the lonely highways.